Welcome to the November 17, 2021 regular meeting of the Lake Bluff Joint PCZBA. First off, call to order and roll call.
Certainly. Member Danley.
Here.
Member Fisher.
Here.
Member Miller is not present quite yet. Member Russell.
Present.
Member Sorensen.
Present.
Member Toll. Here. And Chair Peters.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. First order of business, non-agenda items and visitors' public comment time. As you are aware, we allocate 15 minutes at the beginning of each meeting for an individual to present with respect to any item that is not on our formal agenda. Do we have anybody in the audience tonight, Mr. Cole, that is willing or interested in presenting?
Sure. So I'll note here out loud, we have a couple people in the audience for a petition, as well as one person joining us on Zoom, again, also connected to the Arden Shore petition. No one looking to make a comment at this time.
Okay. Hearing none, moving on to agenda item number 3, consideration of the October 20, 2021 PCZBA regular meeting minutes. Have all of the commissioners had an opportunity to review the minutes? Any proposed revisions or other changes?
No.
Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Agenda item number 4, public hearing, final plan and special use permit 425 to 429 Shore Acres Drive, Lot 1 in Arden Shore subdivision. Mr. Cole, if you could give an overview of the petition, please.
Certainly. So as you'll recall, earlier this year, this body and the village board passed Ordinance 2021-5. So that approved a subdivision and a few variations, let's think of it as in advance, for this development. Essentially, it split up the former children's home up on that site into 2 lots, the western lot to be a driving or a practice range for Shore Acres Golf Course, and then the eastern lot to be a country estate, single-family residence, complemented by 2 accessory dwelling units. So in total, at that time, there were no plans prepared. They were looking into this proposal prior to consummating the sale, but they sought and were granted variations to allow, again, these 2 accessory dwelling units, as well as a fence height variation, potentially to erect a taller fence, taller bit of screening between their property and the driving range or the practice range. So what is required, again, because there are no plans at that time, is that one of the conditions of approval was that they come back to you with their final plan for the development of this lot, so that you can see it, you can make sure that these 2 additional dwelling units are handled properly in a way that respects the neighbors, includes screening and so on. And also through the development of that final plan, they've broken out part of one of the accessory dwelling units into like a separate pool house. That's not proposed to be a dwelling unit, but under the village's regulations today, that requires a special use permit. So that's another part of relief. You can take it all together, but that's shown on the plan. There's some 4 plans included in your packet. And so the purpose tonight is to review this final plan and also the special use permit. They're 2 separate matters, but you can dispose of them together. We have the petitioner's architect, landscape architect, and also their attorney on the line as well to present this for you. And then we can go from there. So happy to answer any introductory questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Anyone who wants to participate in tonight's hearing, we'd like to swear you in, please, if you could stand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God? Thank you. Please be seated. All right. Who will be representing the petitioner this evening?
I'll start and really walk through the architecture.
If you can just stand at the podium and use the mic, just so we capture it.
Yeah, and if you could state your name for the record, please.
Yes, I am Philip Liederbach. I'm with Liederbach and Graham Architects. We're a firm based in Chicago that's been in business for 30 years. We specialize in traditional and classical architecture, residential architecture primarily. With me is Charles Stick, a noted landscape architect who has actually spent a good deal of time on this property, Crabtree Farm, and allowed it to look as good as it does today. We're starting with this slide because when our clients came to us and said, what we're envisioning is something that more or less functions the way houses along in Lake Bluff, Lake Forest, and other places on the North Shore did 100 years ago, where people would use them for in the summer. This was one of the sources of inspiration. We are actually looking to do something a bit smaller in scale. So if I can take you to this next image.
Sorry about that.
This are the dependencies of the house on the property. The scale, as you can see, is 1.5 story. It's more diminutive. The vocabulary that we're using on these buildings is best depicted on the right, where it's a cedar shake that's then been painted. This is going to be a common denominator between all the structures on the property. We wanted to just go ahead and use very simple, humble materials, like one would use on a cottage, whether it be here or Cape Cod or Nantucket. We looked at a lot of the 18th century architecture out east. For example, I think one thing that's just important is actually, not only conceiving of things that are beautiful, but actually getting them built that way. So this is a house that our firm did. It was the first house that we did. So it's quite a bit larger than what we're proposing, but it just shows that there's a commitment to getting the details right, choosing, all the way down to how the mason lays up the wall, choosing the stone, the mortar, etc. The other point that this image illustrates is quite often we'll bring the roof lines down to 6 feet. It gives the building a very approachable scale. In this case, it admits light into a garden that is on the north side of the building. So these are all, I think, fairly sensitive moves that we've tried to incorporate into the ensemble of buildings that we're going to describe or show next. This is an image that Charles shared early in the project that just is part of the inspiration for the meadow on the property, and he can go into detail on that if you'd like. Excuse me, got a little overzealous. So one of the things that we wanted to do is establish a hierarchy amongst the structures on the property. The main cottage, by today's standards, isn't all that big. It's a 1.5 story structure, and so we of 5,900 square feet, and so we wanted these other buildings. On the left side is the garage, or what we call the gardener's shed. On the right is the gardener's cottage. We wanted the scale to break down further, and that's, sorry, I'll master this at some point. So what you can see there is that the buildings are actually quite simple, or this ADU is quite simple. There's 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a den in the middle, and on the the east side, there's a screen porch. On the south side, that's a 3-car garage that basically is the only garage on the property. The next building that's on axis with the center of the gardener's cottage is the pool house, where there's the dining table and things that support the pool and an open porch facing the lake. And before that, the swimming pool, which has grass or turf all around it. To the south of it is a 1.5-story guest cottage that's the second ADU. It has a den on the left side and a single bedroom on the right side. And then there's with its own bath, and then on the second floor, there's another guest bedroom and bath. I mean, what I think you'll notice is there's not a lot of closet space. There's not a big kitchen. I mean, these are very much cottages for guests, not for them not to stay too long. This is a sketch of the main house. It's very sort of casual in design, and something that's intended to feel like it's sort of evolved over time or been added onto over time. It steps down as it goes to the north, out of consideration of our neighbor to the north. And the materials, again, are the Pennsylvania fieldstone, the painted white shakes, and the natural cedar shakes. And then this is the lake elevation of the structure. And on this side, you can see the stepping down, and I show a person on the very bottom right, just to give you a sense of scale. This is the submittal that you've all found included in your packets. It's more comprehensive in nature and focuses on the exact location of the individual structures. One would approach off of Shore Acres Drive and meander through the woods, come to the main house, which is, I think, 58 feet off of the north property line. And the next ensemble of buildings is the pool house and the guest cottage. They revolve around the pool. And there's parking for, I think, 4 vehicles there. And then the drive continues on to what we call the gardener's cottage and the gardener's shed, where there's additional parking for those two buildings and the owner's car. This is the landscape plan that Charles has presented, and can give additional detail on this if you'd like. This denotes some of the trees that are to be removed. We've worked around the trees. The bottom left-hand portion has a lot of red. Those are all dead green ash. There's also one eye looking to the next generation and getting things right. This is the lower level plan of the pool house and an unfinished basement for the guest cottage. These show the first floor plans that we've already looked at the sketches of. And this is the second floor plan showing the guest bedroom and bath in the case of the guest cottage. Now we're at the gardener's cottage and gardener's shed, where we're showing the 3-car garage, and then again, the 2 bedrooms, bathrooms and den, and then an open screen, a screen porch looking back towards the lighthouse and lake beyond. Here is an instance where we're using the field stone on either side of, the north and south side of the pool house, and wrapping around for lack of a better word, bumps on the west side, and you can see the open porch on the that faces the lake on the upper right. This is the guest cottage. To put this in perspective, this would fit inside the garage. What we're doing is buildings that really feel like a cottage that you can see in Nantucket. It's not, everything's really dialed in. And this structure is, of course, the gardener's cottage. And this is the garage. You can see how the roof line's brought close to grade, as I had indicated earlier. And that is an overview of what's being proposed. And I'd be happy to address any questions or make any clarifications.
Just one quick question, the estimated ridge line of the, higher ridge line of the principal residence is going to be what, around 30, 32 feet, somewhere in there?
It's about 30, 33 feet. Yes. And it steps down in 3-foot increments. So the center entry section is the highest, and then it drops by 3 feet for the main, where the living room is, and then as one goes further north, it drops by another 3 feet, and then as it comes east, it drops by 2 feet. It just keeps stepping down, which I think is a nice way to minimize the scale for the neighbor. And it also looks good.
Can you go to an overview of the entire property and where the buildings are gonna be? I see. I can see. Okay. So can you point out the names of the buildings that you just talked about?
Of course. And this is a laser pointer. So this building here is the main cottage. So the center portion here is the portion that I mentioned is the tallest, and then it steps down in 3- and 2-foot increments as you go clockwise. This distance from here to here is 58 feet from the property line, and let's see.
Is that the 4-car garage on the north end?
The 4-car, it's a 3-car garage, and it's in the southwest corner.
Is there a garage attached to the main house?
No.
Oh.
And then the next ensemble is this pool house, guest cottage, little area that revolves around the pool. This building here is the pool house. To the south is the guest cottage. That is the one I mentioned would fit inside this garage, just in terms of communicating scale. And then on axis with the pool house is the gardener's cottage, the front porch of the gardener's cottage. And then off to the south is the garage that serves the property for storage.
So the main house does not have a garage, is what you're saying?
It doesn't.
It's interesting.
Oh, well, we've got this slide up. Can you give a general location of the neighboring homes where they would be?
Yes, the property to the south, the home is right here.
Okay.
And the property to the north is actually, the house is much further away from the property line. And it's in the upper right.
Do you happen to know the size of those homes offhand? I mean, I suspect they're bigger than the main house.
Yes, that's safe to say.
And then I've got one other question just out of curiosity. Is there one entrance to the gardener's cottage through the screen and porch? No other entrances?
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay.
Yeah, this is a very informal configuration and not one. Many things that are on a typical checklist that we normally receive aren't on this one, which is nice. It's been one of the delightful things about the project.
When the petition was first before us, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago, I think that you had contemplated having 2 guest houses. Is that correct? And I think the main cottage was going to be somewhat centered on the property. Slightly revision, obviously. Have you communicated with the neighbors? Because I know they were pretty engaged the first time around, meaning the neighbors to the north and to the south.
I personally haven't communicated with either neighbor or and I can't speak for the client, but I know that they're friends. So I think that we've taken a very neighborly approach. And in terms of initially doubling the setback, and the scale of these buildings is probably 60% of what they could be as accessory structures in terms of the height, and that's an off-the-cuff number, but the short answer is no. I haven't reached out to either. We have walked the property with the neighbor to the south and talked about how the property with the driving range and Liam's property would coexist.
I'll note here, of course, that both the north property, the south property, and Shore Acres received notice by mail of this hearing and are not present this evening.
I know we've had other developers come forward with this property, thinking about putting, number of homes close together, 15, 20 member. That was just, I can only imagine that the neighbors would be thrilled about this approach, this very thoughtful and beautiful approach, even though we're not here to talk about your beautiful design. It's more about the zoning and the smaller buildings that you have on the site. But, I mean, we've listened to other people come before you, and it was going to be, vastly different. So this is lovely, lovely improvement.
Thank you. That's really great to hear.
Yeah, and I just wanted to acknowledge, I was a listing agent on the property. I haven't had any involvement in the property since it was purchased, and it's delightful to see, what the vision is. Exactly what Jill was saying in terms of the number of, I think, long before, long time back, it was as many as 27 homes on the entire property, of course. But, and I love the sort of older feel of kind of the David Adler, the Crabtree, the individual smaller buildings, and the landscaping meaning so much to the design and everything. So thank you for the creativity.
You're welcome. It's our pleasure. It's not every day that you get to work on a project like this.
We haven't talked about, where they have to deal with the fence as well. What's the current size of this is a 10-foot fence. What does zoning allow?
Yeah, so by right, you could put along that property line up to a 7-foot fence in the CE district. You could also plant up to the property line, screening plants. We've spoken with the applicant's team, and we understand that they're waiting to design that fence until they know more about the design of the Shore Acres practice range or driving range to the west. My understanding is that's in the very preliminary stages. They're trying to engage a pretty, I don't know the gentleman's name, but a well-known designer for that, and they anticipate that could take anywhere from 6 months to a year.
Is the fence going to be on this property or the Shore Acres property?
As I understand it, the concept would still be to have the fence be on this property. By approving this plan, they'll lose the ability to go to 10 feet. They can always come back and ask again if they still need that 10 feet. But the way we wrote the ordinance contemplated that they would come back with one plan doing everything at once, and that hasn't quite come together.
You're talking about Shore Acres or these guys?
These guys, yeah, so just the fence there along the western property line between
Right,
these
so we're not
houses.
going to vote on that tonight?
That's correct. So when you approve the final plan, automatically that extra 3 feet, that'll go away. But they can always come back and ask for it again.
So the original ordinance that was adopted, that approved the variation, had a condition in section 5A4. And it talked about in that condition, if the final plan does not include such a fence, the fence height variation provided in section 3C of this ordinance shall become automatically null and void upon the approval of the final plan. So in order to keep that variation, they would need to present this evening, as part of their final plan, that design of the fence. They haven't done so.
I see.
If the village board approves the final plan, what'll end up happening is then the fence variation goes away, and they have to build either as of right, the 7-foot, or they can come back and request a new fence variation, whether it's to go back to 10 feet as originally contemplated, or something else, if it's only 9 feet, or whatever, they desire, they can ask for, and then it would come back before this body to determine if it would be appropriate to grant the variation.
Can that be changed? I mean, it seems kind of silly I think we can do it all here today. I mean, what's the difference between a 7-foot and a 10-foot fence on that property line? Can we amend that to say that it's approved up to 10 feet without having them have to come back?
You cannot.
Okay.
Because it's in the ordinance.
I see.
As if the final plan does not include such a fence, the fence height variation automatically drops. And so it's not included, and so that's what would happen. And we can't grant another variation tonight.
I got you.
But it also may, in the end, work well. I mean, for example, if based on the design of the driving range, the applicant says 10 feet is not what I desire, maybe it needs to be 10 and a half or whatever.
I see.
They can then, the important part, I mean, the variation process on a fence is not, hopefully it's not overly complicated, but that it allows for the review, and that's what was contemplated by the original ordinance was, we don't want something hanging out there, because usually when you approve a variation, we lock them into a plan. And if you,
Understand.
with the ordinances, it always says the variation is contingent upon compliance with the plans attached as exhibit, B or C of the ordinance. And then we know and say, look, this was the fence that you wanted, and if you don't do it, you're in violation of the ordinance. We didn't have that when we approved the initial ordinance. And so this was the compromise in the end, the way to get comfortable that it wasn't going to be something that everybody was uncomfortable with was you have to come back and present us the plan for the fence. But again, nothing precludes the applicant when this does arise and they finalize it to come back if they so desire.
Not to belabor it, but just to emphasize, I mean, we wrote this trying to accomplish exactly what you're speaking to, trying to make this flexible and easy, and just didn't predict this particular set of outcomes.
I understand. So can you narrow down what our obligation is today to approve, if we approve?
Yeah, so if you believe the final plan meets the criteria laid out in the ordinance, if you believe the special use permit meets the criteria for approving a special use, you would recommend the village board.
We're talking about the pool house and the ADU.
Correct.
I have one question as well. Your materials have answered probably the first part, but this is a two-part question. You had initially submitted plans indicating the pool house would be the ADU. It's been separated out. There's a little bit more square footage now, still obviously well within bounds, graciously within bounds. Is there any intent in the future to turn the pool house into an ADU? Any spoken desire?
No. None whatsoever. It's a heavy timber structure, so it really doesn't lend itself to remodeling, but more importantly, there just isn't any intention to do that.
Strikes me as an entertaining space more than anything.
Yeah.
Mr. Russell?
Yeah, my only regret with this development is that we're not going to be able to see it because of where it's located. It is a delight to see something like this come in the door. As Member Danley and Fisher both alluded to, for 25 years, different people have come in and everyone wanted to have a very dense PRD with up to 20 homes packed at the east end of this lot.
27.
You're literally proposing 16,000 square feet of total development, that the lot as of right would allow over 40,000, just the lot at the end. Someone could come in and legally put in a cul-de-sac, meet all the regulations, have 5 homes, 110,000 square feet of development on this property. This is wonderful.
Yeah, we're hoping to preserve the quiet nature of this land.
As you are aware, there are standards for the issuance of a special use permit. I think we can adopt and incorporate by reference the submission that's set forth on page 4 of the petition. Any other questions or discussion among the commissioners?
I'll make a motion to approve, or a motion to recommend to the village board to approve the requested relief and special use permit.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? We could have a vote, please.
Certainly. So this is a roll call vote, and the order for our votes this evening, as is our tradition, is random. First up is Member Toll,
Aye.
Member Miller,
Aye.
Member Russell,
Aye.
Member Fisher,
Aye.
Member Danley,
Aye.
Member Sorensen,
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye,
Motion carries.
thank you.
That was easy.
Next steps for the petitioner.
Yeah, so this will go to the village board for consideration next Monday night, November 22nd. We'll be in touch about the procedure for that. So the board would typically do 2 readings. They'd read it and consider it once November 22nd, a second time in December 13th. I think your client or their counsel has indicated in the past they will ask the board to waive second reading, and so it may be approved as soon as Monday night. After that, we'll go into engineering, building permit, and on from there. So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a tremendous presentation.
Well, thanks again for your time, and looking forward to getting on to next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Agenda item number 5, public hearing, text amendment, accessory dwelling units. Mr. Cole, if you could give an overview, please.
Certainly, and actually I have a brief presentation. I know I'll note again, we have no one here necessarily watching, but I'll still give it briefly for the record, if that's okay, and then we can go into our discussion.
And just to remind everybody, we have talked about this ordinance at quite some length, obviously, over many meetings. Tonight is a public hearing, unlike our prior discussions, which were discussions, but this is a public hearing, so.
Be careful what we say.
So again, in the interest of time, I'll move through this pretty quickly. I know we're all familiar. If anyone has any questions or wants to hear a little bit more, please stop me. I'm happy to go into more detail. So accessory dwelling units. This conversation really came out of the PCZBA's discussion around housing policies and the comprehensive plan back last July was really the genesis of it, as we had both some conversations around the comprehensive plan as well as some interest from a couple members of the community at that time in building accessory dwelling units, perhaps one of those issues that there'd always been some discussion about. This very proposal came up not too long after that time. In the current comprehensive plan, in 1997 comprehensive plan, we know we have a couple goals. One was to promote, orderly redevelopment, rehabilitation, maintenance in the village, emphasizing compatibility with land uses around it, and then also to encourage the development of alternative housing options. Somewhere on the order of 99% of housing in the village is single-family residential. Even for a community of our size, there's very little in the way of multifamily or other units. The most diversity we probably have in town is there's a few, apartment units in the, in the central business district. There's a few small multifamily units just north of the central business district in R5. And there's also, it's still single family, but there's some attached single family in Armor Woods that serves the needs of some of these different users, but not all of them. It's not something we talk about too much, but we also are subject to the state's Affordable Housing Planning and Appeals Act. So before the village was a home rule community, we adopted an affordable housing plan that lays out 5 possible sites for development in the village. After that time, we became a home rule municipality, and based on the law then, up until very recently, we were exempt from the act. The act did not contain language that applies it to home rule municipalities. The legislature recently introduced that here a few months ago, and so it's not clear what the effects of that will be quite yet. They did it in a little bit of a weird way, but the goal of the act is to encourage the village to create affordable housing, and that's why we're required to adopt a plan and to take steps perhaps to implement the plan towards making 10% of units affordable. As defined, housing should be less than 30% of gross income for a family at or about 80% of our area's average median income. So in 2020, that's about $18.20 a month on housing costs. And finally, a more recent village plan. We have a strategic plan. We want to make housing choice. We want to balance supply and demand. We want to encourage implementing diverse housing, and we want to engage the community in the village leadership's examination of creating quality housing options. So you might remember this if you were here in July 2020, the color chart. How do we realize these housing goals? What are our opportunities for housing development in the village? The first is greenfield development. We take a patch of dirt, we build houses on it. Arden Shores is an example. That didn't turn into 10 houses or 20, that turned into 1 plus 2 halves, but that was an opportunity at one point. Another would be Stonebridge, village-owned property east of Jawa. A second opportunity for this is mixed use and downtown redevelopment, right? So as downtown continues to redevelop, that you would continue to have the opportunity to add units within that space. So Block 1 contemplated this, never actually built it. Block 3, different plans have proposed condominiums there. There's infill choices, right? In existing neighborhoods, you could build more duplexes. There was a missing middle housing competition a couple of years ago that looked at, that the village participated in, that looked at building more ADUs and live-work units and small apartments, really in a transitory area, or transition area, I should say, between the CBD and R5. You can do accessory dwelling units, that's what we're talking about tonight. And also within our existing homes, you can introduce more tools to make what's called universal design or visitability, where essentially you have things like a master bedroom on the first floor, or a primary bedroom, I guess is the preferred term now, where you have a zero-step entry for people that may be in wheelchairs or have mobility issues, counters that are accessible at a lower height, all these things that allow people with different abilities to use the housing stock you create. So based on those conversations, our focus at the PCZBA has been talking about accessory dwelling units, pretty pictures of all these different types of units. This is courtesy of AARP. And you know, the idea here, of course, is you have a house and you make maybe a little house or a granny flat or an in-law suite. They have all different names, but a separate area within the house, or as a separate structure where people can live with more independence than if they were just renting a room. And who uses these? It's many of the housing users that our village has had a goal of serving for a long time, that our current housing stock doesn't serve too well. You know, it can be people recovering from medical procedures. It can be adult children. It can be home businesses. It can be aging in place retirement. It can be early career professionals. It can just be a rental. There are a lot of different niches, if you would, that it can fulfill for a homeowner and also for, again, these users. What can they look like? Again, it can be a detached structure, it can be an attached structure. It can be in the interior in an upper level or down in the basement. Very commonly in our area, it's above a garage, it's a coach house. Or perhaps you would convert a garage if you needed it. You'd sacrifice some of that space for cars and you'd make it habitable. Our current ordinance, the draft you're looking at tonight, would allow all of these. Accessory dwelling units are prohibited in the village today. You can't have these separate living spaces with light, heat, and bathing or shower facilities, or perhaps cooking. Again, we interpret the code and have for a considerable period of time to be designed to only allow one dwelling unit on a lot. But we know if we look at the history of Lake Bluff, at the history of North Shore, that there are very many of these that existed before the village had that position, right? Some of the properties on this list are in the estate district, where it was very common to have, quote unquote, a bonus room, maids' quarters, large pool houses, 3, one-story framed residences in 800 Green Bay Road, guest houses, pool houses, bath houses, coach houses, 2 flats. There was a great deal of variety, and I've taken some time to look. I can't tell you where exactly the switch happened. My best guess is maybe in the 80s, but we know that at some point, as much of the country did, the village took a more narrow view on what was allowed. This list is really, these aren't necessarily accessory dwelling units. We don't, a little bit of a disclaimer that we haven't looked at each of these and we don't know what they are and if they're non-conforming or how really they're used. But when we look at these properties, we see things that look like the development that this ordinance would allow. Garages with dormers, garages in the back, separate units. Again, things that are more than one unit to a lot. These are common problems in Chicagoland. A lot of people are talking about it, looking at it. Chicago, very notably, just enacted some permissive legislation on this, I believe, last year in response to a ULI study. A lot of people have taken action to allow these as everyone's trying to solve their housing issues, and a lot more people are talking about it. We also know that throughout the country, California and Oregon have had this authorized for a couple of years. They superseded local zoning to allow it. The state of Illinois has talked about doing that, but hasn't made any progress. New York is talking about it as well. There may be others. So with that foundation, the PCZBA has done a lot of study. You'll recognize some of these. We've looked at publications from ULI, focused here in Chicago, on real-world experiences out in Oregon, on interests in housing from the Harvard Center for Housing Studies, as well as from the AARP. On the left, you'll remember these prototype designs. The village retained an architect at one point to put together some prototypes. What could this look like? I'll note here that those prototypes aren't that useful compared to the regulations that ultimately were developed. They're before you tonight, but I think a very useful exercise in showing, even without some of the provisions that have been peeled away, I would say that it really emphasizes that these will be harder units to build within the village's existing bulk regulations and how we regulate things to control neighborhood massing and character, but still some potential, still some reasonable ways to develop it. So the ordinance you have in front of you tonight, this is what we've talked about the last few meetings. It treats accessory dwellings as a special use because I believe, I hope I'm summarizing the consensus of this group as saying there's too much ambiguity to go directly into not having public review. We want to see these before we really commit to it. We want to have that public engagement and feedback. We know there are drawbacks, and this group has taken some measures to try and balance those. We have some size limits in there that were developed when we were looking at making these a permitted use. We've kept those in this special use regime. The chart at the top right, I think, is the most important thing. We know that our residential bulk rules constrain development pretty well. We know that people build to the maximum they're allowed to. That's what that big spike is. And so we expect that those rules will continue to be the biggest governor on the size and scale of ADUs, but we've also put other rules in place that keep the scale manageable. Again, you have an additional parking stall. We've put in some requirements around setbacks and where these are located as well.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit more about what that chart is, since we can't see the labels at all?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's
What is that?
this is an older one, but so this, in short, and this is just based off of assessor records. It's really kind of a back of the napkin thing, but we took all the units built after 2000, which is when the village's 4-area rules kicked in. The blue, or the teal, I should say, is in our residential zones. The red is in our estate zones. And this is floor area as a percentage of what's permitted. So this middle line here is 100%. You see some go over. Those are taking advantage of bonuses in the code, for example, porches, or perhaps detached garages in the rear. You see there's a little bit of clustering in the back, especially in the estates where, as we just saw with our earlier petition, you can build really big houses and still have a lot of capacity available under our rules to build even bigger houses. But all this is intended to show is just generally what you'd expect. Land is very valuable in the village, and so when people build new houses, they build as much as they can build with the land they have. Hopefully, a common sense conclusion, but we did want to illustrate it too, and I think it's an interesting point to see about development in the village generally. So to illustrate these setback rules, I think I found a spot where you can see these all working a lot. So again, you can't have them, this group's consensus, you can't have them between the principal building and the street. Here this is the corner of Prospect and Moffett. And so we can see, this is 419 East Prospect. You have a corner lot. So again, you can't have them for the full width of the lot between the building and the street. This can be read too. You can get too precise. Down here to the south, can't have them here. Can't have them here. Couldn't build one here, but you can't have it here either. And then on this sort of scooping corner lot, again, you wouldn't be able to have them front of that principal structure. But you could have them in the back. Plenty of room to work with on at least a few of these on places you could still site an accessory dwelling unit. So as you'll recall, you have some rules around rentals, narrowly tailored to keep these just from being rented out to two completely separate parties by an absentee landlord, or by just any landlord. And then also some rules, some other changes we had to make around the way in terms of how we regulate pool houses, a familiar topic for everyone from a few minutes ago, as well as some other changes to how we handle accessory structures without like a principal dwelling, just smoothing out some parts of our code that have come up from time to time, and again, making a couple incremental improvements on the way. So that's the show. Your next steps, we did have one item of public comment we shared with you. We've got a few things ready for you if you choose to act on the points raised in that. Happy to talk about anything else. After that, you're welcome to continue the hearing or make a recommendation to the board.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cole. Commissioners, any questions? Anyone want to address the questions or issues raised by Ms. Collins?
Yeah, I think we should discuss that in order of her suggestions or thoughts.
All right.
Can you read her letter?
Yeah, so I'll try to summarize if that's okay. So she opens by saying she's glad that we aren't considering this height exception for coach houses anymore. At one point, you know, in the residential districts, you have a 17-foot height limit. That's difficult to make a one-story garage with a second-story ADU on top. That really leaves you with a flat roof, if you can even do it. So we were looking at an exception that would make that a little bit more permissive, and did not choose to proceed with that. She goes on to talk about how we calculate floor area ratio in this ordinance. So right now for the whole code, gross floor area is defined as being the floor area from exterior wall to exterior wall, but it actually also includes some exterior spaces that aren't defined by walls, right? So in the definition, mechanically, it says that things like, I believe, patios, porches, decks, those things are floor area if they don't meet certain requirements. And so there's just a technical definitional issue here of, you know, how do you work around that? We have some alternative language here for you if you'd like to simplify that. If you'd just like to make it a more traditional, here are the walls and here's what's inside and don't worry about the rest. The upside to this, to the approach you have in your ordinance too, is, you know, our floor area rules do include penalties, for example, for having tall ceilings and things like that, and that would, the formulation you have would tend to discourage those in ADUs. No real recommendation I could give you in either direction. It's a matter of preference. Similarly, after that, I would say the last point she makes as far as the ordinance before you is other ADU ordinances have a restriction on where the entrance is. They're trying not to make a house that has two separate entrances from the front. And so you would require those to be on the side or the rear of the property. We have what I would call a soft option and a hard option I can show you if you'd like to adopt that. The soft one says that you should have it somewhere else, and again, you'll look at that through the special use permit process for now. The hard option requires that it be faced in a different direction. The last note, again, not really before you tonight, but Ms. Collins does go on to say that she thinks that allowing 2 residential units on a lot, subject to all area limitations by right, would be a good idea for the village. That's, she says that's historic to Lake Bluff, unnoticeable to observers, to use her words, and that would allow constructing other types of missing middle housing. So, hope that is a fair summary. Again, we distributed the whole
But
thing to you and it's in the packet.
The last point has nothing to do with what we're doing tonight. That's a separate.
Yeah, you would not be able to act on that tonight. That's, of course, a very big zoning change. You can certainly talk about it through the comprehensive plan in the future if you'd like to.
Mr. Russell, your thoughts?
Well, in terms of Mickey Collins's suggestions, the only one that really caught my attention was the suggestion that we not allow the second entrance along the front of the home. And I thought in many respects, especially on our narrower, smaller properties, that may not be a bad idea. But I would like to distinguish between a door that faces the street and a door, and two doors that are on the primary wall that is closest to the street. If you have an L-shaped house, I can envision accessory dwelling units being constructed that are attached to the rear of the home and may come out on an L shape. And that the door into that accessory dwelling unit may face the street, but it would be well back of the primary entrance to the home. And that I don't have a problem with, but I can see architecturally where forcing this second entrance onto the front of a home may not, or I would think that that's not something we would want to allow. That
The
we would
current door?
want to allow the door to be on the side.
Does the current proposal suggest that it has?
No, it does not. I misspoke there with the word force. She's suggesting that right now it allows someone to do that. There's nothing in the ordinance that prohibits someone from popping the second door across the front of a regular home on a
And
small.
what would be the objection architecturally for that, or visually?
I personally think she strikes a good point in that I think it would look odd on a lot of the homes, especially on the smaller lots.
I think more than architecturally, being in public safety, that could confuse responders in which is the front door.
That makes sense.
And then you don't know, which door are we going to? And it could delay, life-saving measures, so.
So that I can understand. The other one is more of a preference thing, but that,
I think to George's point, though, there could be the case where both doors are facing the street. So I kind of like the soft approach that you mentioned, Glenn, and suggesting that they should be on different sides of the home. But luckily, we're doing special use now so that we can look at it and say, well, I understand why you're doing it on the same side. So
I agree.
I think the soft approach would be a good way to go.
I agree.
It sounds like there's a consensus on that second point.
Yes, I agree.
Ms. Orton?
Oh, I agree. I agree with especially your point. If we were to consider later on duplexes, then you have two doors possibly facing the same way. So that side with an ADU, we don't know all the permutations that this could take, but I would think that the primary door for the primary residence would always take some precedent. It would look odd architecturally for a door of an ADU to have the same standing. But I think, given that this is a special use, that we may have some time to work through that, or consider it a little bit more deeply over time.
And to just mention your point of a duplex, generally duplexes, or always duplexes, would have separate addresses,
Right.
whereas
This would
homes
be
with
two-
ADUs would not have.
That was my
separate-
question. It
I
would
was
not change
wondering that.
it would be the same address as the,
Yeah. Would that break out at all to be, with an ADU, it will always be the same address, right? This is a US Postal Service sort of question, isn't it?
yes. That's
Yeah,
what my
there's,
question.
so we actually had to look into that a bit with Shore Acres, and there's really not a consistent rule that we can find. So in some cases, you get Unit A, in some cases,
Right.
you get 420 whatever and a half. I will tell you, for interest up in Arden Shore, because those are bigger units and there's some response time issues, as it were. Our fire department requested, and we are giving those 3 different addresses completely to make sure that there's no ambiguity if there's a call. But that won't be true of most spots in the village.
Okay.
So that option, that B1 that Mr. Cole put up on the screen looks good to me as a way to handle it initially. It gives the opportunity for a conversation with the soft approach.
Yes. Excellent.
Yeah, and, you know, I might suggest tweaking the language just slightly to say, and minimize the visual impact of the accessory dwelling unit into surrounding residential properties and the streetscape, including by minimizing the appearance of the entry doors to the ADU. But I think that would work, and I think Mr. Cole has kind of crafted you know, this is well crafted by Mr. Cole in terms of where this would go in the ordinance, so.
Great.
Sense?
Agreed.
And then with respect to the porch issue and additional gross area, any further discussion or any thoughts on that?
But, and Glenn, just to clarify, or Ben, both, just to clarify for me and maybe perhaps for everyone, as I understand the ordinance as it's written now, we have rules that allow people to build so much deck and so much porch before it counts. And let's say on a regular lot, you're allowed 500 square feet of all this excess miscellaneous square footage. But if someone comes in the door and says they want 600 square feet of porch, and they're only allowed 500, we would charge 100 square feet of floor area because they're exceeded the bonus that they're allowed. With the ADUs, as I understand it, if the lot is allowed 500 square feet of bonus, and the primary structure has 400 square feet, that we would still allow the accessory dwelling unit to have the additional 100 square feet. Anything beyond that would count as floor area. Is that not what's been drafted?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
That was, yeah, that was my understanding.
Yeah, to explain it, I think from Ms. Collins' perspective, it's just, this is just a quirk of how we implemented our floor area rules here in Lake Bluff. So when we say the words gross floor area, that means basically how we calculate floor area with everything that comes with it. So when we say, if we don't back some of these things out, when we say 800 square feet of gross floor area, that also means extra floor area for tall ceilings, no floor area for porches, and all the other things that come with it. So we presented, and in the ordinance it's drafted, one way of kind of backing some of those exceptions out. I think, if I understand Ms. Collins right, she's advocating just for something even simpler than that, which is just to say, here's your floor area rule, that's totally separate, and here's the area of your ADU, and that's just wall to wall, and it's a drafting issue more than anything, as I understand it.
Okay.
So
Kinda
so the
technical.
argument is that it's a bit confusing.
Yeah.
Well, we will have workshops in order to explain those kinds of things, right? So
That's correct.
I think as written, I think it's fine. At least my understanding of it, which is how you explained. And if that's the intent, then that would be my preference.
Any further discussion on that point? Any further discussion on the proposed ordinance? Or proposed amendments, I guess. Hearing none
Is there any, Glenn, is there anybody here on Zoom from the public?
No one from the public wishing to be known. We have one gentleman still here related to the Arden Shore matter, but he's not asking to speak. And I'll note aloud, no one here in the audience with us tonight.
Good.
Okay. Hearing none, is there a motion, please?
So, I'll make a motion accepting the text amendment as written with the additional statement concerning the entranceway that we discussed.
And we're recommending body on this particular motion.
Correct.
Okay. Is there a second, please?
I second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, if we could have a vote, please.
Certainly. Member Sorensen,
Yes.
Member Russell,
Aye.
Member Danley,
I,
Member Toll,
Aye.
Member Miller,
Aye.
Member Fisher,
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye,
Motion carries.
thank you. And congratulations to the commission.
You're good.
Agenda item number 6, staff report.
Sure. In a slight change, if you would, Mr. Chair, if we could take the commissioner's report first and then the staff report.
Certainly. Agenda item number 7, commissioner's report.
Okay. So for staff report then, I'll note, of course, there have been developments in the world, a few developments in the village. The first is that there's a proposed settlement of the Stonebridge litigation. The village board will be talking about that Monday night. The second part of the comprehensive plan is talking about historic preservation regulations. The HPC's been working on that for a considerable period of time. There were some meetings with the village board earlier this year. Procedurally, this group still has a very technical text amendment hanging out with that, a hearing that was completed last year. The HPC has recommended, they had many policy changes and many administrative changes, and to give the policy changes some more time, they're recommending that the board just act on the administrative changes. So that'll be coming to the board at some point here in the near future. Again, I mentioned that because it has come before this body indirectly, and it's also in the comprehensive plan. We have some agenda items coming up for next month's meeting. I suspect it won't be too much or too little, probably meeting roughly the same length, maybe a bit longer. But that depends on how a few things go in the coming weeks. So,
Give me a
Yes.
second. Did you get me as present? I wasn't here for a roll call.
yeah, I've got you. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, we would, on this occasion, recommend that the PCZBA enter into executive session pursuant to the Illinois Open Meetings Act to discuss pending litigation.
All right, thank you. We are requesting a motion to go into closed session pursuant to section 2-C-11 to discuss pending litigation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Just one moment there. So I had the motion is Fisher, second by Sorensen.
Yes.
Okay. Member Fisher,
Aye.
Member Russell,
Aye.
Member Sorensen,
Aye.
Member Danley,
I.
Member Toll,
Aye.
Member Miller,
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And just for the benefit of the public, we will adjourn immediately after the closed session.
Okay. We're happy to get some water, sodas, anything like that. We need a couple minutes to turn the room and get our executive session ready. So feel free to take a break. We'll be back with you in a moment.
Thank you.